In the darkest days of World War II, America was losing the Battle of the Atlantic. German U-boats were sinking Allied ships with terrifying skill, choking the vital supply lines to Europe. In that desperate moment, a brilliant, eccentric billionaire proposed a truly radical solution: an airplane so enormous it could carry 750 soldiers across the ocean, a flying boat made almost entirely of wood. It was supposed to be a war winner. Instead, it became a billion-dollar punchline that flew for less than a minute, and then never again. This is the story of Howard Hughes's obsession, a technological marvel born from crisis, and the enduring mystery of the plane that never truly flew. To understand why anyone would even think of building such a monster, we have to go back to the early 1940s. The world was on fire, and the Atlantic Ocean had become one of the war's most brutal battlegrounds. Winston Churchill later said, "The only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." And he had every reason to be. German submarines running in deadly formations called wolfpacks were turning the ocean into a graveyard. They hunted in the cold's dark depths, torpedoing thousands of Allied merchant ships packed with essential troops, food, and fuel. The losses were staggering. For a while, U-boats were sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them. It was a slow, agonizing bleed-out that by 1942, the Allies were dangerously close to losing. This crisis demanded a revolutionary idea. The problem wasn't just about replacing ships, it was about bypassing the threat completely. If ships were sitting ducks on the water, what if you could leapfrog your cargo over the submarines? The idea was simple in concept, but insane in scale. A flying ship. An aircraft so massive it could haul the cargo of a freighter or an entire battalion of soldiers in a single trip, far above the reach of any torpedo. The U.S. War Department was desperate. They needed a way to get men and materials to Britain without feeding the wolves of the sea. This set the stage for one of the most ambitious and bizarre chapters in aviation history. The call went out for a machine that could carry an unheard-of payload across the Atlantic. But in a world where every scrap of metal was already feeding the war machine, this airborne ark would have to be built from something else entirely. It would have to be made of wood. Faced with this crisis, two of America's most formidable and wildly different titans stepped up. The first was Henry J. Kaiser, an industrial mastermind. Kaiser wasn't an airplane guy, he was a builder. His company was famous for its Liberty ships, which they were churning out at an unbelievable rate. But even he knew that building more targets wasn't a winning strategy. So Kaiser, the shipbuilder, came up with the flying boat concept, announcing to the world that his team had plans for gigantic flying ships beyond anything Jules Verne could ever have imagined. He had the industrial power and the government connections, but he didn't have the aeronautical genius to make it fly. For that, he turned to the second man, Howard Hughes. By the 1940s, Howard Hughes was already a living legend. He was a Hollywood tycoon, a business magnate, and most importantly, a brilliant and obsessive aviator. He didn't just buy planes, he designed, built, and flew them to set world records. Hughes wasn't just in the game, he was changing it. He was also famously eccentric, a trait that would both drive this project forward and become its greatest enemy. The two men met, and on November 16, 1942, they formed Kaiser Hughes. The government handed them an $18 million contract, that's over $300 million today, to build 3 prototype flying boats. The terms were nearly impossible. They had just 24 months to design and construct the 3 largest aircraft the world had ever seen. And they had to do it without using critical war materials like aluminum. The plane would be made almost entirely of wood, using a new, unproven process. From the very beginning, the project, designated HK-1, was a clash of titans. Kaiser was all about speed and mass production. Hughes was a meticulous, agonizing perfectionist. Kaiser quickly grew frustrated with Hughes's glacial pace and obsessive focus on every single detail. He realized the grand vision of a fleet of 500 flying cargo ships would never happen under Hughes's command. So, in 1944, Kaiser walked away, leaving Hughes to go it alone. The aircraft was renamed the H-4 Hercules, and the contract was cut down to a single prototype. With Hughes in sole command, the H-4 Hercules project became a masterclass in contrasts, a work of engineering genius conducted by a maestro of managerial chaos. What started as a 2-year wartime emergency plan slowly became a 5-year peacetime saga of obsession, controversy, and staggering expense. Mocked as the Spruce Goose, the plane wasn't spruce at all. It was built from birch using a revolutionary process called Duramold, which fused wood and resin into a strong, lightweight composite. To power this behemoth, Hughes strapped on 8 of the biggest piston engines of the era, the Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp Major. Each 28-cylinder engine produced 3,000 horsepower, giving it a combined 24,000 horsepower to rip the 400,000-pound beast out of the water. But the systems inside were the real game changers. The forces needed to move its massive control surfaces were just too great for any human. So Hughes's team pioneered one of the world's first fully powered hydraulic flight control systems. This artificial feel system made the colossal aircraft flyable. But the obsession that fueled innovation also destroyed the project. Howard Hughes's perfectionism caused endless delays, and costs spiraled out of control. The government's $18 million vanished fast. Hughes kept going with his own money, pushing the total to $23 to $25 million, over $300 million today. By the time the war ended in 1945, the plane still wasn't finished, and its purpose was already gone. Its purpose was gone. The U-boat threat was defeated. What was meant to win the war became a wildly expensive relic. Washington turned on it. Critics laughed, calling it the flying lumberyard, a boondoggle that would never fly. November 2nd, 1947, Long Beach Harbor. Thousands lined the shore, a mix of excitement and skepticism. After years of delays, cost overruns, and public ridicule, the H-4 Hercules was finally ready for what were supposed to be simple taxi tests. Howard Hughes sat in the cockpit. The massive engines roared to life, churning the harbor into foam. First run? Smooth. Second run? Smooth. Reporters thought the show was over. Many began to leave. Then Hughes pushed the throttles forward. The Hercules accelerated. 90, 100, 135 miles per hour. And then, against all odds, it lifted off the water. The 300,000-pound wooden giant was airborne. The flight lasted just 26 seconds. It skimmed a surface, never more than 70 feet high, then touched down gently. For a fleeting moment, Howard Hughes had silenced every critic. The flying lumberyard had flown. But that moment would be the plane's entire story. For just 26 seconds, the impossible became real. But history is full of ideas that flew only once. What forgotten invention should we uncover next? A failed superweapon? A lost experiment? A machine too far ahead of its time? Share your ideas in the comments. And if you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories behind history's greatest risks, subscribe and don't miss the next one.